This video will show you how to replace your front spring and strut assembly on this Subaru Outback. This is part of your front suspension, located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. We'll remove all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts. If you have a locking lug nut, you're going to want to make sure you have that key. Since mine does have the locking lug nuts, I'm going to be using that first. We'll just turn this until it feels like it wants to seat. Once it does, go ahead and turn that counterclockwise to remove it. We'll be using a 34mm to remove our axle nut. We'll use a hammer and punch directly in the center of the axle to break it free from our wheel bearing. Once you do have movement from that, we can continue on. Let's start separating the upper sway bar link from our front strut. You can see the stud along the back side of the front strut here. Now for this, we like to try to remove any rust from the threaded portion first. I'm going to use some penetrant, and I'm also going to use a wire brush. Now we'll be using a 17mm for our mounting nut. Typically for this, to loosen the mounting nut, you're going to want to hold onto the stud. To do that, you'll be using a 6mm Allen head socket. Generally, I like to break the nut free, so I'm just going to use a 17mm. Once I get a little bit of movement here, I'm going to find that the stud will spin as well. At that point, we'll have to be using our 17mm and that 6mm socket. Now, as you can tell, the nut did loosen, but only so far. Now, obviously, there isn't much room to turn this, so I'm only holding the mounting nut still. Now, to loosen this, I'm going to be turning the stud clockwise, which will in turn turn the nut counterclockwise. There's that. Now we can dislodge our front brake flex hose from the bracket attached to our front strut. Use a 12mm for the mounting bolt. Now to dislodge this, you can see that there's 4 locking tabs right here. To easily squeeze in all 4 of these at the same time, I'm just going to be using a 10mm socket. I'm going to slide it over the tip of this and press it towards that front strut bracket. That's going to squeeze in on my locking tabs, and now I should be able to give this a slight wiggle and pull it out of place. Just a quick inspection of that, confirming it's not damaged in any way. If it did happen to break, you could use a wire tie during the installation process. Now we can move along to our front strut mounting bolts. As far as these bolts, you're going to find that you have a 19mm headed bolt making its way from the rear of this through towards the front. And in this area, we can see a 19mm mounting nut on each of these bolts. Now a quick note about these. They're not interchangeable. The upper one is actually a camber bolt. It's also going to have a washer in here. Let's hold the bolt head with our 19mm wrench and remove the mounting nuts. Once we have the mounting nut off of the first bolt, we'll just start it back on a couple threads while we fully remove the next piece of hardware. You can see my washer there. Next piece of hardware. Should be able to slide that out of position. Just a quick inspection. Of course, you do want to clean these up. Make sure they're not rotted, weak, or damaged in any way. Go ahead and set that aside for now. Let's get this next piece of hardware out of here. As we start doing that, we're going to gently start pulling this away from the front strut. When we do so, we want to be extremely careful not to cause any damage to our front axle while we pull this away. The axle should start pulling out and away from the wheel bearing and not start stretching or damaging either one of our CV axle boots. Now have a close look at that upper mounting bolt that I just removed. Up in the smooth shanked area, you can tell that it's actually oblonged. It's not a perfect circle. That's for the alignment professional. That's to make the adjustment for the alignment in the end. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to carefully start pulling this away from the front strut. We'll hang this aside. Now, if you needed to, you could use a strap of some sort to prevent this from falling away. Now we're pausing in the wheel well. We're making our way up inside of the engine compartment and we're looking for our strut tower. This is going to look the same on either side of the vehicle. You can see that there's 3 pieces of mounting hardware. We'll be using a 12mm for each of these, but keep in mind, these are the last things holding that front strut to the vehicle. So when you're removing the last piece of hardware, you need to make sure you're also holding onto that front strut. All right, I'm going to hold on to that front strut now. Let's go ahead and pull that out of place. There it is, friend. We'll make sure we clean and inspect the mounting area along the top here. And just a quick wipe along the bottom there. Okay, let's prepare to install our brand new front strut. We're going to take this and bring the upper portion up along the body of the vehicle. We need to align the mounting studs with their corresponding ports on the body of the vehicle itself. There we are. Now that we have that up in there, we've got our 3 brand new mounting nuts. I like to use some blue thread locker. They're started on. Let's go ahead and snug them up. Now we have those bottomed out. We are going to torque them, but we need to do that once we have the full weight of the vehicle back on the ground. So we'll be doing that once we have the wheels torqued. Now we're inside the wheel well, and we're going to start getting this back in position. As we do so, we're paying attention to our axle, making sure it presses towards the wheel bearing. Everything should be aligned. We're bringing the steering knuckle up towards that front strut so we can start installing our mounting bolts next. As far as those mounting bolts, I like to make sure that I coat the entire smooth shanked area with some anti-seize. As you remember during the removal process, I mentioned that the upper mounting bolt is the camber bolt. We don't want to mix these up. Now that I have that slid through there, the upper mounting bolt, the camber bolt, also has a washer. And of course its mounting nut. We're not tightening this yet. Continue on to the lower mounting bolt next. Make any adjustments as necessary and slide it through from the rear towards the front. Obviously, we have our mounting nut for that as well. We'll go ahead and snug these up. The torque for each of these is 114 foot-pounds. We have our ABS wheel speed sensor wire. Just go ahead and slide it right through that bracket. As I mentioned, if it was damaged or doesn't hold for any reason, just use a wire tie. You definitely don't want this getting damaged while you're driving down the road. Now we can start attaching our front sway bar link to the front strut. When we get this in position, we're going to make sure we hold that stud and we'll tighten our mounting nut. Once we have it snug, the torque for that is 44 foot-pounds. Now we'll make our way along the rearward side for that hardware. Now I've got my wrench on the mounting nut. For this, since there's minimal area in between the front strut bracket to be able to turn the wrench, which would turn the nut, I'm going to be using my socket directly in the center on the shaft, and we'll be turning this counterclockwise, which will in turn turn the nut clockwise. Now that I have that snug, I'm going to torque it to 44 foot-pounds. Let's get this flex hose in place. Start in your 12mm headed mounting bolt and snug it up. Double check to make sure that's tight and definitely not twisted in any way. Now we can install our axle nut. When installing the axle nut, you never want to use an impact tool. If you over-tighten this, you will cause damage to your bearing and possibly the axle. For this, you just want to use a hand ratchet or hand tool of some sort, and we'll go ahead and snug it up. Once you do have it snug, we'll get this closer to the ground so we can torque it to the proper torque specification. Now we have this in an area that we can start torquing it. To torque this, you can either have a second person inside of the vehicle pressing on the brake pedal, or you can have a pry bar like I have here. We're going to go diagonally across these studs all the way down to the ground. That's going to prevent this from turning on us while we continue on torquing this to 162 foot-pounds. Once you do have that torqued, go ahead and remove the bar. Now we're going to pay attention to our axle nut and the axle itself. Look at the axle. You can see that there's a rectangular slot. We're going to be using a hammer and punch to try to drive part of this nut down into that groove. That will prevent this from loosening up on us while we're driving down the road. Once you're confident that it's locked down, we'll continue on with our wheel. One last inspection in this area and we can reinstall our wheel. Once you have that in place, you're going to continue on with all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. If you do have a locking lug nut, you want to use that as well. We'll start them on, snug them up. Get the wheel back on the ground, and the torque for each of these will be 90 foot-pounds. Now we have the wheel back on the ground, so we're going to torque these to that 90 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Now that we have all the weight of the vehicle back down on the ground, we're inside the engine compartment along the top of our strut tower. It's time to torque each one of our 3 mounting nuts. 15 foot-pounds for those. Okay friend, we showed you the installation of the front strut on your vehicle. The process for one side of the vehicle is the exact same thing as the other. Once you've completed that, take your vehicle for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.